bee sanctuary? And would you blame Monsanto for making Roundup or the government for their lax rules on pesticides?
Both. Both. There's been a frightening loss of bee colonies, particularly in this country. I don't know about around the world, but to such an extent that the scientists are now saying this is dangerous. About the canary in the mine. Methane gas builds up in coal mines, and because the canary's respiratory system is the breath is so rapid, they will keel over first. So then get out of the mine because your bird is dying. Well, that proliferates around the planet. When the canary dies, you're in trouble. Well, we got thousands and thousands of species of animals that are disappearing because of what we're doing.
Hi, my name is John Miller. I have the best job on earth. See that bee? That bee's been very busy in a flower, and it's just covered with pollen. Pollen is the male part of a flower, and this honeybee is then going to the next flower where it will shed some of the pollen it acquired. And that's how we get seeds, and that's how we get fruit, and that's how we get nuts, and that's how plants seduce bees so they can reproduce. It's an exchange, it's a seduction, it's reproduction. And I have a great part in this exercise, and though orchardists and farmers grow food, the link is the bee. I'm not the link, I just bring the link. We've been keeping bees in America for a very long time, almost 400 years. For 120 of those years, I'm losing my sound mic, for 120 of those years, my family has kept bees. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my mic. For 120 years, my family's kept bees. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my dad, myself, and Ollie. Ollie's my grandson. I have the best job ever. A lot of the foods we like to eat are made possible by honeybees and the pollination work they do. And that's how I make most of my living in 2014, going from crop to crop, pollinating different fields and orchards, and my great-grandfather made his living selling honey. Things have changed. 40 years ago, my dad first brought bees to an almond orchard in California. It was our first paid pollination work. That's how I make most of my living now. We'll start with the almonds in California, we'll move to the cherries and the apples later in the summer. We'll be on the high plains of North Dakota pollinating canola, sunflowers, buckwheat, and oilseeds. Almond production has soared, but in the meantime, hive populations have dropped almost in half. As our diet has improved and we live longer, healthier lives, bees are living shorter, less healthy lives, and it's because pollination work is very demanding on bees. This is what U.S. colonies look like, and this chart's a little old, but you get the idea that in 1945 we had about 6 million hives, and we have about 2.3 million hives in America now. We're losing our bees. And a lot of this turbulence, and it is turbulent, these are tumultuous times in beekeeping. A lot of this is a result of three primary factors, and I'll go into those a little bit, and then we'll discuss a solution that I think might bear fruit. Just seeing if anybody's still awake. The first issue is pasture, and I've just gone over some of the issues with pasture and the bees' inability to find enough forage, enough good pasture. And I don't know how you think about bees, but when a honeybee alights from the hive and goes flying across your backyard, buzzing through the neighborhood and the village and the fields of America, she's grocery shopping. Grocery shopping. And she gathers nectar and she gathers pollen and brings it back to the hive. It's all flown back to the hive where it's stored, and then later that pollen and nectar will be fed to a baby bee sister whom she will never meet. And this baby bee sister is just vital to our food supply. We need to take better care of our baby bees because they're not getting enough of this natural pollen. So I have responded to the need, this deficit, this need of the hive with what's called a pollen patty. This is a pollen patty. It's about a 1-pound slab of brewer's yeast and sugar and vegetable oil. And it tastes pretty good, actually. But it's no substitute for pure pollen. It's no substitute for what bees have been gathering here for 400 years. And even though there are people in this room, students at this institution, who have proven that you may live on Top Ramen and Bud Light, eventually it's not going to sustain them. And though I take pollen patties to my hives between fits of pollination, pasture remains a real issue in this country. We have too many acres under the plow, not enough acres in conservation. Oh, look at that. There's no pollinator on this planet that can outrun that plane. Occasionally, when my bees fly grocery shopping, they'll cross a field that's been sprayed. We're not real good at pesticide use in this country. In fact, we're just terrible at it. Because when a field is sprayed, it kills the bugs. It kills the bad bugs, but it kills all the good bugs too. I usually learn this once or twice a year. A honeybee learns it once. And the reason I can get a picture of these bees after they've been sprayed is because a honeybee will try to get home, but it's impaired, it's suffering neurological damage because it's been sprayed with a pesticide, and when it gets back to the hive and it tries to get into the hive, the guards at the front of the hive won't let them in the hive, and so they perish in front of the hive because they won't let contaminated bees into the hive. Pesticides kill bugs, all the bugs, good bugs and bad bugs, and that's the second thing. So the first thing is pasture and not enough, and the second thing is pesticides and too much. And if I could give Oliver, my grandson, a blessing, if I could give him a gift, I would give him a world with dramatically lower pesticide use. But my village likes to eat flawless fruit and perfect succulent berries and carrot seed from flawless seed and pumpkins that are delicious. And so we have pesticides. The third thing, this is great. We have a parasite in our bees. It's called Varroa destructor. See those ticks? Those are ticks, and they're just like a tick. Varroa destructor arrived in North America in about 1987, and it kills honeybee adults and honeybee children, and it is a dirty needle. Varroa mites vector diseases into bees like mosquitoes do to us. It's really hard to kill a bug on a bug. If we don't, we're going to lose our bees. We have to find a way to address this pest. And I think there are ways of doing it, but I'm probably going to be gone in 20 years. And so in 20 years, if I ask you to think about something, because bees are the link to our food, where are we going to be with food in 20 years? Will we enjoy the abundance and the diversity of food that we enjoy now? Will there be bees? We have some issues. Managed honeybee colony losses in the United States for about the past 7 or 8 years. This is kind of new. This is kind of different. And I'm as the gatekeeper of the food supply, I'm being buffeted by this, and I'm not good at it because we're losing about 25% of the national herd every winter. Every winter we lose. Like if I had 4 children and one died each winter, on the 5th year I would have no children. And so each year we make baby beehives from our parent hives, and we make thousands of them and thousands of them. And the day's going to come when I'm going to be unable to sustain this. And that's the word that bee guys are getting familiar with. It's like, this is unsustainable. We need another path. Meet Project Apis M. Project Apis M is a nonprofit. They fund bee research, but they also provide seeds, wildflower seeds, to plant a meadow. I see there's a turf project. You've got a turf project going 1 block down here. Instead of turf, what if we planted seeds? What if we planted some California poppies and some blue eyes, California bluebells, some crimson clover, and some alyssum? What if we had a meadow instead of a perfectly manicured lawn? That would provide forage for the bees. Safe forage, healthy forage. This is my forage plant. We planted it last year, and the bees loved it. It's mustard, it's rapini, it's some vetch. The neighbor's cow loved it. And we're planting it again this year. This is good forage for bees. It's healthy. It's a place they can get good nutrition to rebuild their hive. Can we help? Can the people in this hall make a difference? Sure, you can make a difference. This is a little group of volunteers from Lincoln, California, on a piece of land. And Justin Wages is the land manager for the land trust where these plants, trees, and shrubs were placed. And it made a difference, and my bees found it, and they thrived. Now later today, you're going down to the grocery store, and you're going to see shelves groaning with food, and you're going to say, oh, fat boy Johnny just made this whole crisis up. Look at all this food. I am the gatekeeper. My son is the gatekeeper for your child's village. And though the bees will be unable to thank you, I will thank you. Thank you.
The natural world around us as we know it is changing rapidly. Earth's ecosystems are suffering due to human activities that span the planet. Extreme weather, rising global temperatures, drought, loss of habitat, and pollution are greatly impacting all species. But it is one group in particular that, despite their beauty, diversity, and tireless effort in sustaining our ecosystems, lives in great peril. We call them pollinators. And no matter where on Earth you live, you are most likely surrounded by a wide variety of these animals that make life on our planet possible. Deeply interconnected with plants and other species, and an essential component of the web of life, pollinators sustain healthy ecosystems.
Insects play a very important role in our world, on our planet, by pollinating plants. There are a lot of insects, including honeybees, obviously the most well-known pollinator.
About 80% of everything that you see flowering is pollinated by a pollinator instead of wind pollinated. So pollinators are key foundational species in terms of maintaining both the food chain, but also maintaining our ecosystem.
We probably wouldn't survive on the diets that we have today if we didn't have pollinators. And that can be something as tiny as a little bee or as big as a bat.
Pollinators are animals that move pollen from one plant to the next. And without pollination, we wouldn't have the fruits, the seeds, and many of the other edible things that we love to eat, the nuts, as well as our salads.
The variety that we have on our plate really does depend on pollinators. For example, alfalfa. We don't necessarily eat alfalfa, but cows do, and cows produce milk. So we really owe that to a pollinator.
For the Western diet, we usually say it's about 1 out of every 3rd bite of food. So it's very likely that today you ate something that was brought to you by an interaction from an animal pollinator and a plant.
I think they've estimated it's in the billions of dollars that creatures like honeybees save us by pollinating these plants and trees and vegetables. I think that there's been a lot of evidence that if you take out of our supermarkets all of the fruits, vegetables, herbs, nuts, legumes that are pollinated by these creatures, we wouldn't have a huge amount left to eat.
Hummingbirds pollinate. Bats pollinate, especially as you get to equatorial areas. Beetles are really important pollinators in some places. And flies as you get to the tundra areas and the high mountains. But bees are probably the most important pollinator when it comes to our agricultural crops. And I would say butterflies are our most recognizable pollinators because people know and love the butterflies, and they're moving pollen as well.
We really have to think more broadly about what is a bee than just a honeybee, a bumblebee, or a carpenter bee. There's over 4,000 species of bees in North America, most of them non-stinging. Most of them are not honeybees, and the honeybee came over with the colonists.
Bees are obligate pollen feeders, so they have to have pollen in their life cycle, basically to feed to their young, their babies in their nests. And so the way evolution has worked, the plants have devoted a lot of plant money, let's call it, to developing flowers, nectar.
And I don't think that we've created a machine or a device that is able to cross-pollinate flowers in an adequate way, certainly not in anywhere near as an effective way as something like a tiny little beautiful honeybee.
I would say it is as bad or worse than what people are saying. There's a new global assessment of pollinators, and we're finding that about 40% may face extinction over the coming decades. That is an amazing number, and we really need to be working to solve this problem, or else it's going to harm us as well as the fabric of life on the planet.
An example of some historical perspective here, in the 1940s, you had approximately 6 million U.S. honey hives. In 2000, that goes as far down as 2.5.
That pollinators are facing multifactorial assaults. So they are facing habitat loss. That's pretty much agreed on by everyone.
Our agriculture is geared to monocultures. That is, there's food for the bees only for about 3 weeks. Let me say almonds give food for the bees for 3 weeks, and then nothing is there for the bees.
You have some bees that only go to one species of plant to feed their young, and others broaden out only small increments, only within that one genus, only willow, only cactus. And so you have a system where plant diversity is extremely strongly linked to the bee diversity in the area. You remove plants, you're removing the bees that pollinate those plants right from the system.
They also are having assaults from pesticide misuse.
It's the insecticides, the pesticides, the fungicides. All of that are a great problem for these insects which are so highly in tune with nature.
We've seen as many as 140 different chemicals inside honeybee hives.
There's scientific evidence that it could be tied to neonicotinoids that are being used in particular pesticides.
From pathogens and parasites, from mismanagement, and also from just ignorance about the value of pollinators.
The overusage of the honeybee to create honey for us.
I equate it to pieces falling off an airplane. At some point, we're going to start to see real problems with this.
Literally, they're bone dry and empty.
And we're already starting to see problems in nature, but with native plants that actually are not getting sufficient pollination because they're not getting the bee visitation that they used to. So it is already happening on a small scale and could happen on a bigger scale if things continue this way.
You know, first is education. I think that the more folks can learn about this, the better apt they will be to be able to help with the solution. The more they understand, the more they can also carry the torch for the work that's being done right now.
I'm trying to catch the wasp.
The main purpose of this Nature Outdoor program is to bring children in contact with nature. Every single day they play with nature. They get to know about pollinators. They get to know the impact on the environment, how to take care of the insects, how to love them, and the importance of it.
A baby moth.
Here in the city of Houston, we have already planted over 100 plus fruit trees in the community to fight climate change and to also be able to make a friendly habitat for pollinators.
So the pollinator gardens that we have, they serve, of course, as a little corridor in a way, too, for those native species, especially the monarchs.
We grow a variety of things. We have rosemary, lemongrass, blue sage over here.
You're going to see cut-leaf daisies, all types of sunflowers. You're going to see blue bonnets.
Now, we just don't want this to stay put in Houston. We need to see this everywhere.
Our government is well aware that there's an issue, and President Obama signed a pollinator memorandum, a very strong federal plan to really change the way the federal government operates with respect to pollinators. And it's trying to help both the monarch butterfly increase its overwintering and also the honeybee to reduce its losses.
The USDA and Forest Service have supported a number of different resources to help the public learn about pollinators.
We have technical guides about pollinators for land managers. We have guides for gardeners. We have something called the eco-regional guides to pollinator-friendly plantings. We did this with Pollinator Partnership.
On the Forest Service website that provides educational materials, resources from the USDA, like the plants database, which can be used to both identify plants that will be native and thrive in your region.
There's another one, the People's Garden, which is an initiative started out of USDA that has now grown to allow folks to really grow gardens in their communities. Over 2,500 gardens across the 50 states.
No, we do very basic types of research. So we ask the question of how are bees doing? We're looking at how do you count bees? Our goal is to develop a monitoring program at a national level for bees. That's our objective. We know how to do it.
Well, every state has to come up with its own conservation plans for wildlife. We're hopeful that they will include pollinators in those conservation wildlife plans. Well, basically everyone can do something, so everyone who eats has a stake in this issue.
What we can do is a lot. Our backyards are perfectly good places to manage for bees, to be a bee refuge.
We want to make sure that you also reduce the impact of all pesticides, and we also want to make sure that you learn about pollinators and support those groups that actually are working on pollinators' behalf.
You can plant things in your garden that promotes bee activity. Bees love plants like sage, They love rosemary. They love anything that flowers. Lavender is a great thing for bees. Clover.
One of the great things about milkweed is that it supports butterflies, and they need places to stop. So if you're planting milkweed, you're providing a place for not just butterflies to stop, but for monarch butterflies to stop, eat, and continue on their journey.
So if you have even a windowsill, window boxes that you can put plants in.
Make sure that you're planting so that every season of the year that you can possibly have something flowering, you have something flowering.
And it's not just about bringing in bees, it's about bringing in all facets of life, because if there's a place where animals live, then all the pollinators will be there as well.
The relationship between plants and pollinators is the foundation of a resilient ecosystem and our own survival. It is impossible to imagine our world without pollinators. By protecting them and restoring their habitat, we ensure their future and our own.
It's not just bees that are slowly disappearing. All sorts of animals and insects that help pollinate our food might be facing extinction, according to a new report from the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. That list includes bees, butterflies, flies, moths, wasps, beetles, birds, bats, and other creatures. About 75% of the world's food crops depend on pollination, at least in part. That's an industry with an estimated annual value between $235 and $577 billion globally. The United Nations Farm Group says all sorts of factors could be putting the species at risk, including pesticides, changes in land use, alien species, diseases, or climate change. Though experts who took part in the study admit there are wide gaps in their understanding of the problem. For instance, they aren't sure exactly how certain pesticides or genetically modified crops are affecting certain pollinators. However, the group does say there is enough evidence to give governments or organizations reason to take action. For Newsy, I'm Jay Struberg.
mature cocoa tree produces 1,000 flowers a year, and studies indicate that less than 5% of the flowers get pollinated because the insects that do the pollination, the natural pollinators, are being depleted through the spraying of chemicals. So if you have 1,000 flowers and you are getting 40 pulls, 20 pulls, that is what is accounting for the 450 kilograms per hectare. What we are only doing is artificial, that's to intervene and then do the pollination. The selection of the hand pollination for the program is targeting the youth, especially young cocoa farmers, so that they can undertake their own pollination as well as set up enterprises to pollinate other farmers' farms. Cocoa Board has already recruited and trained 30,000 farm crews who have been deployed to assist farmers with the skills acquired. Now, Chairman, it is projected that the number will be increased to 30,000 by May next year to assist cocoa farmers in the next 3 years. Through public-private partnership, Cocoa Board is about to introduce motorized handheld slashes for weeds. We want to move away from the machetes, the use of the machetes, and then use motorized handheld slashes, that's for weeding, and motorized handheld pruners for pruning cocoa trees and the removal of mistles.
Episode of the Vegan Kill Cult, we skimmed the surface of the suffering, bloodshed, environmental destruction, and chaos that's being forced upon the world by the insufferable kill cult of veganism. I find this a surprisingly neglected subject in the carnivore/vegan battlefield of discussion and debate, and have decided to turn this into a series so that we can continue to shed more light on this dark side of veganism. Today's darling destroyer of health, employed in service to the vegan kill cult, is a wicked chemical called chlorothalonil. Chlorothalonil is a controversial broad-spectrum fungicide used by unthinking vegetable producers in their struggle to feed the vegan demand for an herbivorous diet. Technical-grade chlorothalonil contains hexachlorobenzene, a persistent organic pollutant that is curiously already banned under the Stockholm Convention. Chlorothalonil is highly toxic to fish and other aquatic animals that pay the ultimate price each time there's enough rain to produce runoff into local tributaries. Chlorothalonil is known to cause kidney damage and is considered a probable human carcinogen based on observations of cancers and tumors of the kidneys and forestomachs in laboratory animals. Chlorothalonil actually attracts honeybees and has been proven to be a key factor in the decline of the honeybee population by making the bees more vulnerable to a particular gut parasite, as well as destroying the bees' ability to sufficiently supply food to growing larvae.
A month, the control bees, they averaged about 43 individuals per colony. The colonies that were exposed to fungicide residues on flowers, they averaged about 12. We're talking about a profound effect. This is basically what appears to be like the first hard evidence that a fungicide, not applied to adults, but just on the flowers, caused major colony declines in a single bumblebee species, Bombus impatiens.
Albert Einstein once supposedly said that if bees disappeared from the face of the earth, mankind would only have 4 years left to live. Now, there's no evidence that he actually said that, but it does touch on a real concern because the demands of the vegan movement are threatening to kill all the honeybees off, which is an important concern because as pollinators, bees are a keystone element of the global ecosystem.
And the idea that it's somehow made these items toxic just because they've had conventional pesticides sprayed on them is a misnomer.
Knowing what we know now about the damage and suffering being dealt by just one particular pesticide, it's safe to conclude that in order for a vegan to be misleading people with this pesticides are okay message, as if the vegan is ignorant, corrupt, or just plain mentally disturbed, which would be no real surprise since YouTube's vegan poster boy has publicly expressed a hatred for children and a desire to stomp babies.
I fucking hate children. They literally make me sick. When I see babies in a commercial, I start to gag and almost throw up, and I have to look away and mute it. And when I see babies in a stroller, especially when they're crying, I just want to put my foot through the fucking thing and step on it until it's nothing but blood and pulp on the fucking pavement.
The mental illness of the vegan kill cult is horrifying, and at the end of the day, you figure out that we do have a choice. We can either save the honeybees and ourselves by focusing on a regeneratively raised, grass-fed, meat-based diet and enjoy a promising future for a healthy planet inhabited by healthy, happy people, or we can allow this vegan kill cult to continue to rape, pillage, and plunder our health and our environment until no sign of life on this wonderful earth remains.
So I personally have been a vegetarian with a lactose issue for a little while. So I don't necessarily call myself a vegan, but I have a reasonable number of friends who are vegan. They don't consume honey because it's an animal product, and some of them have claimed that they have ethical issues with regards to bees and beekeepers. Is that a valid concern, or is that a misguided concern?
I think in terms of a personal choice, if they don't consume it because it's an animal product, it's a totally personal choice, and I've got no issue at all with that. In terms of the beekeeping practices, I think there seems to be this negative connotation that beekeeping is just like bee farming, and farming in the negative sense where, you know, we've got masses of bees that are being abused and we're just constantly stealing their honey. But I work with so many beekeepers, both from the commercial scale, so really, you know, thousands and thousands of hives, to hobbyist and amateur beekeepers as well who only have a few hives. And everyone that I've met, they love their bees. They don't want their bees to be sick. They do it because they love it. It's not just a money-making scheme for them. And they really look after their bees well. And I think when people are really concerned about, you know, the safety and health of bees, because we know that bees are dying around the world. But if we don't have these beekeepers who are very experienced and who know how to look after their hives and look out for diseases and be able to pinpoint when their hive is sick, how will we save the bees, right? If we can't tell that they're sick, if we don't have these beekeepers and we lose that whole practice, we won't be able to have these healthy managed bees that we know are essential for our food production, because bees pollinate something like 2/3 of all the food that we consume. It's not just one issue, it's a multitude of issues. So it's things like pesticides, it's things like a poor understanding of bee health or inexperienced beekeeping. It can be access to floral resources. So a lot of the Australian commercial beekeepers need access to national parks and public lands to get all those beautiful eucalypts that their bees can be foraging on. And if they don't have access to those places, where do the bees get their food?
Right.
So there are lots of complex issues. And there was this series on Netflix called Rotten, which you may have watched, and I watched the Cowboys and Bees episode of that one.
Right.
But they talked about the dangers of pollination, and in particular almond pollination. So we know that almonds are a hugely popular food at the moment, almond milk and all sorts of things that you can do with almonds. And almonds are pollinated by bees. So what happens during almond pollination season is thousands of beekeepers around the country all come together in this almond orchard. And you can imagine that's very many, hundreds and hundreds of hives, right, that are all in close contact with each other. If one of those hives has a sick colony, then there's a potential to make lots of those hives sick. And if we don't know how to look out for those diseases, then how will we know that the bees are getting sick? And when we take them back to our own house and you look around at the bees, you know, that sick hive is now coming in contact with, it could be this flow-on effect. So that's one of the main messages that came out of this series, and people are very aware now that this, you know, pollination is something that we should be looking at, and we should be thinking seriously about how we can monitor the health of our bees and our beehives.
Wow, that's fascinating. I had no idea.
Which of these can you eat if you are a strict vegan?
Any of them, right?
Go on. Who's gone for it? No, why not?
Was one of them made out of animals?
No. So almonds and avocados, all of them, in fact, it's the same reason as honey.
Oh,
they can't exist
bees.
without bees, and the bees are used in, well, let's call it an unnatural way, because they're so difficult to cultivate naturally. All of these crops rely on bees, which are placed on the back of trucks and taken very long distances across the country. It is called migratory beekeeping.
God.
And it's obviously Can we change the picture, please? We can't look at the holes.
You can't look either, can you?
No.
Has it gone yet? No.
Yes, it's gone.
It's gone.
So it's migratory beekeeping, and it's an unnatural use of animals, and there are lots of foods that fall foul of this. Broccoli is a good example. Cherries, cucumbers, lettuce, lots of vegan things actually are not strictly vegan. So bad news for millennials, I'm afraid. Avocado toast is usually not vegan.
Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 things that would happen if bees died out. Number 10. Honey will disappear.
Obviously, without bees, we would no longer get honey. Humans have been harvesting honey for about 9,000 years. Beekeeping was important in early agriculture because bees pollinated crops, which allowed them to bloom and produced honey as well as wax. While most people think of honey as something you eat, it also has a bunch of different uses. Notably, it is used as an ingredient in the cosmetic industry. It helps keep your skin healthy and is great for the scalp. It's also effective as a natural remedy for treating cuts and burns, so it's found in balms. Another major use of honey is cough medicine and lozenges. The honey helps both the taste of the cough aids and it helps soothe the throat. Honey is so diverse that in all the ways that honey is used, the average American uses 1.3 pounds of honey every year. Honey is also a $300 million industry that employs thousands of people, so without bees, one of the healthiest and most versatile foods in history will become a thing of the past.
Number 9. Many fruits and vegetables will simply stop growing.
Bees play a vital role in the world's ecosystem. According to a report by the United Nations, of the 100 crop species that provide 90% of the world's food supply, over 70% are pollinated by bees. According to the BBC, half of all the food in the grocery store would be gone if bees disappeared. This includes such everyday staples as almonds, apples, avocados, cashews, blueberries, grapes, peaches, peppers, strawberries, tangerines, walnuts, watermelons, and, probably worst of all, coffee. Of course, the disappearance of these foods would have far-reaching and dire consequences, which we will explore later on in the list. So feel free to take a minute to mourn the possible loss of coffee before moving on to more bad news.
Number 8. Pollination by humans.
One thing we may be able to do to save a few of the plants is pollinate them by hand. This is already being done in China, where they are suffering from a shortage of bees. Workers in southwest China take buckets full of pollen and paintbrushes, and they go through apple and pear orchards, pollinating each blossom by hand by painting the pollen onto them. Children are used to get the blossoms at the top of the tree. If bees were to completely die out, humans could use this method to pollinate some fruits and vegetables, but it will only be done on certain crops, especially those that are incredibly valuable, like coffee. It couldn't be done on all crops simply because there aren't enough people to pollinate all the plants that are currently pollinated by bees, mostly because plants can only be pollinated in a small window of time and humans are too slow and simply aren't as efficient as swarms of bees that have been pollinating crops for thousands of years.
Number 7. Dairy products would disappear.
An additional problem that humans will face in a world without bees stems from the fact that we aren't the only ones who eat plants that are pollinated by them. Another major consumer is dairy cows. They need about 100 pounds of food every day, and they have a rather complex diet. Most of what they eat, like alfalfa hay, needs to be pollinated by bees. Without the alfalfa, there wouldn't be enough food for dairy cows, meaning things like butter, dairy milk and cheese would just disappear. Sheep and goats also eat pollinated food, so don't expect either of those to replace cows. In fact, we may start to notice this becoming a problem in the near future. Almond hulls, a waste byproduct of almonds, are often added to dairy cow feed to make the food less expensive, which in turn makes dairy cheaper. However, almonds are heavily dependent on bees, and with the bee numbers dwindling, almond production will most likely decrease as well. One other way this will be a problem is that dairy cows are also used for beef. About 17% of all beef comes from dairy cows. Without dairy cows, beef prices would go through the roof.
Number 6. Cotton wouldn't grow.
Not all the plants that bees pollinate are something we eat. They also pollinate cotton, which is a staple of the clothing industry. Can you even imagine a world without cotton? There is a good chance that you are wearing something that is made from cotton, or at least contains some cotton at this very moment. A few clothing items that contain cotton are denim, t-shirts, underwear and socks. It's also used in other everyday items like bed sheets, shoelaces, disposable diapers and toilet paper. While we can make clothing that is similar to cotton like polyester, the problem is that new demand for these synthetic fabrics will put a tremendous strain on the materials needed to make them, and they are not as plentiful as cotton is today. Needless to say, clothing in a post-bee world will be much different and probably much more expensive. So if you're planning on throwing away that old t-shirt, you may want to hold on to it until you're sure the bees are going to stick around.
Number 5. So what would we eat in a post-bee world?
You may be wondering what we will eat if the bees go away. As we saw, cows and beef will be affected, but how about pigs and chicken? The good news is pigs will pretty much eat anything, including dead people, and chickens eat non-bee pollinated food as well. That means that pork and chicken will likely become the staple proteins in many people's diets. As for crops, wheat, corn, soybean and rice do not need to be pollinated by insects, so they will still be plentiful. A few everyday staple fruits and vegetables that were pollinated by bees will also survive with human intervention. Potatoes, tomatoes and carrots only need a small amount of pollination. However, the crop production would drop significantly. Also, you can say goodbye to a lot of different cooking oils like canola, coconut, almond and sesame, which will no longer exist.
Have you ever been a nanny?
How hard can it be? Does Miles get in trouble a lot?
Like I'd tell.
Miles was such a sweet boy.
Number 4. The cost of food will skyrocket.
One thing you've probably gathered through this list is that a lot of fruits and vegetables won't grow anymore, food will be scarce, and while humans could pollinate plants, like we previously mentioned, that is only going to make food even more expensive. We don't even have to wait for the bees to disappear to experience this. We've already seen it happen in places like Scotland. In the winter of 2012, more than a third of the honeybee colonies were destroyed. This led to increased food prices simply because once something becomes scarce, the more expensive it becomes. This is especially true for necessities. If bees keep dying off the way they are, there will be a steady increase in the price of plants that bees pollinate, like apples, cotton and coffee, until there are no bees left. And then who knows how much it will cost for a cup of coffee that was hand-pollinated.
Number 3. Malnutrition will be a huge problem.
Humans are complex machines and we need different vitamins and nutrients to stay healthy. This complexity would become a huge problem if bees were to go extinct. In 2011, a study from UC Santa Barbara's National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis found that across the planet, bee-pollinated crops provide the majority of the lipids, a large portion of the minerals calcium, fluoride and iron, vitamin A, C and E. Without the foods, we physically wouldn't do well. Vitamin A is needed for the immune system and night vision. Without vitamin C, scurvy could become an epidemic, and while a lack of vitamin E doesn't hurt us, we need it to help with the immune system. Many people would also suffer from iron deficiency. All of this would make us sickly, tired and weak all the time. Wounds would take longer to heal and will keep opening up. Some people will have problems fighting the common cold. What is truly ironic is that honey helps with both of those problems. If all of that wasn't bad enough, the foods that are pollinated by bees also contain nutrients that lower the risk of cancer and heart disease, meaning there could be elevated levels of both.
Number 2. There'll be a possible worldwide economic crash.
Without bees, the world's economy is going to take a massive hit. There are going to be industries like coffee, cotton and food production that just wouldn't exist anymore. This would have far-reaching consequences. For some perspective, let's look at what would happen in the United States. The US is the third biggest producer of cotton, a $21 billion a year industry that employs 125,000 people, and that industry would simply vanish. As we discussed in Entry 7, the dairy industry would probably also disappear. Currently, there are over 47,000 dairy farms in all 50 states. While we couldn't find an overall figure for the dairy industry in the US, we did find the figure for its largest dairy producer, Wisconsin. It contributes $43.4 billion annually. This doesn't even include companies who make dairy products like Kraft, Saputo and Nestle, who would probably fold without dairy. The reason the dairy industry would collapse is because alfalfa wouldn't grow. Amazingly, just growing food for cows is a $10 billion industry in the United States. Those are just 3 industries, and we could go on about apples, canola, almonds and so on. But another problem we want to focus on is that this is just the US. Other economies throughout the world would also be devastated. Take for instance the $81 billion coffee industry. What would happen to developing countries like Ethiopia and Indonesia that rely heavily on exporting coffee? Needless to say, without bees, the world's economy would collapse, just like a colony.
Number 1. Famines throughout the world.
The good news is the demise of the bees probably wouldn't bring about a cannibalistic apocalypse where everyone starves to death. Darn, right? However, that said, famines are likely to happen, especially in developing countries. The reason that humanity will survive is because food crops like corn, wheat, rice and soybeans grow without insect help. However, it would take a while to switch over to these crops. Our best hope would be that if bees died off gradually, this would give us more time to prepare new sustainable food sources. If all the bees were to die off tomorrow, it would put a tremendous strain on resources while farms were converted to grow corn, wheat, rice and soybeans. During that time, famines would be likely. Without bees, it would be hard to sustain our current population, which is still growing. This simply comes down to the fact that food availability will drop drastically and costs will increase, which means less access to food for many people. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect here is that bees don't even have to disappear completely for this to be a big problem. One of the big issues we face right now is that the human population is increasing, but the bee population is dwindling. This means there's going to be less food and cotton, but more people to feed and clothe. Having a greater demand is never good when it comes to life's essentials. So while humanity would be able to survive the demise of the bees, the only question is, do you really want to live in a world without wine, cheese, ice cream, and coffee?
So really...
What are you doing? 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 What do you want? What do you want? What are you doing? It's big. I'm not a flower, bruh. I'm not a flower. I'm not a flower. Anyways. Oh boy. Listen, I'm not like trying to change the game or nothing, right? I'm not, okay? It's just this can you, what is it? What, you want to be in the video? What do you want? What do you want? Not you, fly. Not you, get out of here. Now you over there. Anyways, yeah, this video is about bees. Anyways, and like I was saying, I'm not trying to change the game or anything, but I just want to lay some perspective here on the subject, and I don't care. Y'all take it wherever y'all want to take it. Okay? A lot of people have questions. Okay? They ask about honey. Okay? And is honey vegan or is honey not vegan? If I'm vegan, should I use honey or should I not use honey? Let me explain this. Let me just put everything all out there just so you can make your conscious, moral, ethical decision on whether or not it's a good idea for you to continue consuming honey. All right? Check it out. Honey. The first thing we have to understand is how it's made. Okay? That's one aspect. Two, we need to understand what veganism is, or what being a vegan is, and what that means that you have to stand for, and how that correlates to our relationship with the bees and or the animals. Okay? I used to be a beekeeper. We kept bees for about 1 year. When the winter came, the bears came, you know, so that whole thing about the bears tearing the thing apart and the honey, yeah, that's real life. The bears, they literally will take your beehive and they will disintegrate it into splinters to get that honey. And that's what happened the first year. But the thing is, a lot of people, and I gotta tell you something, man, from my videos that I tell you every time I make a video, this is from experience, okay? I'm not gonna go and try and tell you something that I haven't had experience with, okay? And I've had experience keeping bees, and I had to understand them. I had to understand the queen. I had to understand the brood. I had to understand the timing of their honey, how much honey they're making, when to bother the bees, when not to bother the bees, what time of the season to feed the bees because there's not enough flowering or nectaring out there, and there's a whole lot that goes into bees, okay? And let me just try and paint a whole entire picture here so you guys can take it, you know what I mean, and y'all can apply it to being vegan. Now, being vegan, as far as I'm concerned, means you're not going to harm an animal or any animal or living thing for your own pleasure and or consumption, okay? So, when I look at bees, it goes like this, okay? What people don't understand about bees is a bee, okay? A bee goes out, finds a flower with nectar in it, okay? What the bee does is the bee takes this nectar and it puts it in its stomach. But the bee doesn't put it in its regular stomach. The bee puts it in a compartment to the side of that stomach called the honey stomach, okay? And the bee flies that nectar, because it's called the honey stomach, but it's not honey yet. It's nectar. And basically what it is it's sugar water from a goddamn flower. They just took some sugar water from Earth. It's sugar water, okay? They fly it all the way back. When they fly it back there, okay, they take that from the honey stomach, and they dump it into one of the little hexagonal, you know, storage units there. And they just keep dumping it in there. That's what they do. While the bee, while she's in flight, while they're in flight, say I'm carrying this in my honey sac, and I'm hungry, or I need energy, I can siphon or open a flap on one stomach, and it will siphon some of the nectar into that stomach so I can continue doing energy, flying around, and doing what it is I have to do. So, a bee goes out, it gets nectar from a flower, puts it in its honey stomach, goes back to the hive, takes that nectar, puts it into, and now inside the honey stomach, it gets extra, it gets constituents, it gets more constituents, and other enzymes and so on and so forth are added to this honey. Then, actually, it's not honey yet, to this nectar. Then it's put inside of there, and then what happens is that is dried. It's fanned out, and that's dried because the temperature in there is usually like 32.8 degrees or something like that, and it's hot. And basically, through time, what happens is the moisture and or water evaporates till it just leaves, you know, just like maple syrup or molasses, it leaves the sticky, gooey honey that is left. Okay, now, some people want to go, well, it wasn't the bee's stomach, and then like, isn't that like bee puke, and this, that, and there, it's like, okay, it wasn't the bee's honey stomach. Yeah, the bee did have to regurgitate it. Yeah, the bee did have to like regurgitate it out into the thing. So yes, yeah, I guess you would have to say, yes, it's bee vomit, but if you look at the simplicity of it, it's sugar. It's the bee took liquid sugar from over there and it transferred it over here. If you want to look at it like vomit, you can, but it's not. Because if it wanted to be vomit or whatever, then it would come from the regular stomach, which is digestion, all this crap or whatever, which doesn't, it's not only going to be digesting sugar, which is all the bees eat. I'm saying so, but it's in its purest form. The bee is perfect. Its stomach and its body is perfect. You know, has anybody ever heard about bees? You know, oh, bees are spreading around a parasite. No, bees perfect. And their entire system in their inner workings is perfect. If you were to open up the bee's stomach and you were to take this liquid and put it in a lab, it would be pristine. It would have nothing in it, nothing wrong with it. So when it comes down to it, you're eating a very, very thick, crystalline, golden crystalline form of an elixir that was created by the bees, and it gets that golden color because they take that and they mix it and they do different things with the different pollen and the different trees and everything that's around. Otherwise it would be crystal clear. But they do a thing called they make bread honey. They'll make bread honey for the larvae. What's bread honey? Bread honey is a mixture of the honey and the pollen together. And in the book I read, they said, yes, they must make this bread honey and mix it together because the bees need adequate protein so that they can cut. Because if you go and you research bee pollen and or royal jelly, you will see that it has all of the amino acid constituents. Ain't nothing protein about it. It's the amino acids that are in there, the building blocks of life, and that is what they mix, okay, into this sugar. So you're getting that ATP, glucose, glycogen, you know, energy transfer, and at the same time, you got the amino acids right there. So, I mean, come on, man. Y'all looking at these bees right now. They're perfect. They're zooming. They're on point. They're doing everything on point, and they are running on nothing but pure energy. And, man, y'all better be lucky I'm doing this video, yo, because I'm sweating out here. They're running on pure energy and pure sugar, and they're just getting the purest form of amino acids. Okay? There's been jars of honey, 3,000 years old, found in Egyptian tombs. Okay? Let's not go there and say that honey is not for human consumption. It is. But let's do a little bit more, you know, education here. While keeping bees, me and my friend realized that bees need a certain amount of honey to make it through the winter. That is their source of food. Okay? They just need the honey to make it through the winter. Okay? Any other time, they're fine. Because like I just told you, they always have a belly full of nectar, or while the season and they're flying around, or they have that honey storage. So if they're in the season and they're flying around, they're doing what they got to do, they have plenty of honey, they got plenty of nectar, they got plenty of energy. It's during the off season, because a lot of people don't understand bees. I don't know if you guys think they hibernate or something like that, but they don't. What happens is they go inside, they huddle around each other all together, and they stay as warm as they possibly can. And they use the honey that they have collected throughout the entire season. They use that as, they basically use that as their storage. So if you're going to worry about the bees, you don't worry about taking their honey. Don't watch a video of a factory that, you know, produces honey in some big, huge thing. That is where things go wrong on an industrial level. Okay, if you want to say something's wrong with honey, then go to the guys that are using chemicals. They're spraying the hives. They're killing the bees. The factories that, you know, have automated system with hives and broods where they just pull it through and then they scrape the bees off and they do all that. Those are the individuals that on a negative level, it's not fine-tuned. It's not done the right way. The way it's really supposed to be done is it's supposed to be done raw. You're not supposed to have to heat anything. You're not supposed to have to filter anything. You should never have to bother the bees. You should never have to fumigate, spray the bees. You should never have to, you know, do any kind of chemical anything with the bees. And, you know, if you're a vegan and you're a vegan person out there and you would like to use honey and you want to feel more morally ethical about it, you know, become a beekeeper or find a farm or something nearby and ask them if they would mind if you would put your bees here on their property. Find somebody. I'm telling you right now, there are people out there that grow things. There are farmers. There are people that do agriculture that would appreciate it if somebody would just come there. They actually pay beekeepers. They pay them to bring their bees there and pollinate their crops and everything for a month or so. And then those people load up their bees and take them other places. This is a business. Okay? So if you feel like, you know, you might be harming the bees by doing the thing, you're not harming the bees. The only time the bees are harmed is if it's in an industrial manufactured kind of manner, or if you have a person that is stealing so much honey from the bees that they can't make it through the winter. But if these individuals have a business and they're actually selling you honey, that means they're not taking all of the honey from the bees. That means their bees are making it through the winter. Okay? So the idea is just don't take, whoever it is you're getting your honey from shouldn't be taking more honey than the bees can survive with. And anybody that keeps bees is smart enough to know not to do that because you'll kill off your entire hive. If you kill off an entire beehive and it's dead and it's done, you have to either go find another hive that's swarming with the queen, and then you have to trap that and or trap the queen inside, or you have to go online, you have to buy another queen, you have to take the queen and you have to introduce her in there, and then you have to hope to God that the hive accepts that queen. It's a lot of work. So the people that go into getting your honey, I'm pretty sure that they don't kill the bees. But like I said, the only unethical part about honey that I see is if you're killing the bees in the process, using chemicals on the bees, and or you aren't giving them or leaving them enough honey for the winter. That is the only discrepancy I can really see here with honey. You understand? Because when it comes down to it being bee puke or something like that, check this out, right? If a cow, okay? We like grass, right? We like grass, we like kale, we like lettuce. It's all the same shit. It's fiber and chlorophyll, okay? Green melanin. If a cow goes and chews up a bunch of grass, spits it over there, spits it over there. You know how it is nowadays. Somebody can go and do something on that and be like, man, the cow spit with the amino acids, it turns it into this, and man, these cow balls right here are really healthy. Of course, you know, that's what we do. And the next thing you know, it's like, yeah, man, I got me a ball of this cow spit grass. You know, we'll come up with a name for it, you know, manuka. You know, I got me some manuka. What's that? Yeah, it's some cow spit grass, you know. Is that bad? Is it bad to eat, you know, grass that a cow chewed up and then he just spit it back out, you know, and let it dry it in the sun, and it's got like a nice crisp, you know, it's like, you know, kale chips, you know, kind of tastes like bacon. Would that be unvegan? You know, would it? Okay, you ever watch termites? You ever watch them make a mound? What do? They'll sit there and they'll take some dirt, right? Dirt and saliva. They'll put it all in their mouth, and then they take the dirt and they boom, and they build their mound, build their mound, build their mound. And the sun bakes it, evaporates off all the saliva, and just leaves the dirt. If we start eating termite dirt, is that not vegan? Like, oh my God, you're not vegan. You're eating termite dirt. That's dirt puke. That's termite puke, right? Because the idea is you're not chopping up the bee. You're not chopping up the bee's wings. Nobody's taking the bee's wings and cutting it off. Nobody's hanging bees up by their neck and going slicing their throats. Like, yeah, I can't wait to get some of this bee blood. Oh, I want the bee butt. Ooh, yeah, sprinkle some of them bee wings on my salad. Bee wings. Ooh, I want the eyes. I hate the eyes. No, we're not carnivores, okay? And we need to stop holding ourselves to these ridiculous standards without doing any conscious thought or thinking outside.